That we watched right at the beginning before worship was just a little preview of the series that we're getting ready to start this morning called Aha. The series itself is based off of a Kyle Idleman book and series that he put together, but we won't be looking at directly anything from the book, just the idea that he laid out to begin. But he had this to say as an introduction to the series itself. He says, aha. The word aha is defined as a sudden understanding, recognition, or resolution. He says, over the years, I have talked to lots of people about their point of aha. I've listened to their experiences as they've told about how and when God got their attention. As I've heard their stories, I've discovered that aha happens when three elements come together. It doesn't matter how different the specifics are. When these three things come together, aha happens. The three ingredients that come together to produce aha are a sudden awakening, brutal honesty, and immediate action. And if you study the many aha moments in Scripture, you'll discover the consistent collision of these three factors. But maybe most clearly of all, aha is seen in what is probably the most well-known of Jesus' parables, the story of the prodigal son. And it's found in Luke 15:11 through 32. Most of you are probably familiar with that, or at least I would hope that most of you are familiar with that story. But whether you are or not, for the next several weeks, we're going to study this story that Jesus told, because it can teach us a lot about God. It can teach us a lot about Jesus. It can teach us a lot about ourselves. And it can teach us a lot about aha. It's my prayer, it's my hope that by the end of this series, that we will all have an aha story to tell. My guess is that most of us already have that story. We may just not even realize it yet. But again, my prayer is that we will all have an aha moment, an aha story to talk about. And what I mean by that is that we'll have a story to tell about how God has changed our lives. And I hope He's changed all of our lives before this, but maybe we're just not aware of it or not able to put it into words. But we have to start at the beginning. The beginnings of the stories are very important, aren't they? The beginning, you don't really get to the end without the beginning. We all have heard it, but most of the fairy tales that we read to kids start out what? Once upon a time. You start at the beginning. So, just for a little bit of fun this morning, let's see if you can name the story by its beginnings. I'm giving you an easy one to start out with. In the beginning. The Bible, or Genesis, either one, yeah. The next one is, when Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 111st birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Anybody? The Fellowship of the Ring, Lord of the Rings, yes, the first of that trilogy. For you movie fans out there, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I would have been very, very disappointed if you didn't know that one. Probably, in my opinion, the greatest opening line of any book that I've read. There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. Does anybody know that one? C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia series, it's The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. Anybody? The prequel to The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. And then finally, one that I've never read, but I'm guessing most of us know, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Tale of Two Cities. Yeah. The beginnings of stories are important, though, aren't they? They're very, very important. It sets the stage of what life was like before the story began. It sets the stage. The beginning of a story often says a lot about what's going to happen at the end of the story. Sometimes when we start talking about aha, when we start talking about this idea, we forget how the story began. It becomes defined by the changes that occur and the beginning's forgotten. So sometimes we focus on the changes, we forgot where it began. But why is the beginning so important? I mean, that's a valid question. Why is the beginning so important? The beginning tells the story. Without the beginning, there really is no story. If you think about it this way, we've all heard those great rags to riches stories, right? Well, if you forget the beginning, it's the rags to riches story without the rags. It's just some rich guy at the end. And if you forget the beginning of the story, sometimes you don't get what all has changed and where the story has gone. So we need to spend some time at the beginning of the story in Luke 15. It sets the stage for us. It tells us what's going on in the story. It tells us where the family has been, what life was like before the story actually starts taking place. We learn a lot about it. It gives us a little hint about the end of the story as well. So if you want to turn with me to Luke 15, we're going to look at 11 and 12 this morning. And again, just the beginning of the story, the beginning of the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son. Jesus said, He also said, a man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate I have coming to me. So he distributed the assets to them. This story begins at home. It begins with a father and his son at home. A good home from everything that we can tell. It's not a poor family. It's a family that's together. It's a family that has enough wealth that the younger son wants what he thinks he has coming to him. From all that we can tell from the beginning of the story, they had a good life. In the end of the story, if you jump ahead to the end, we find that the father has servants, he has cattle, he has livestock. Home is a good place to be. So that's the beginning. We find a good place. But there's something in the younger son. There's just something in his life that makes him want to leave. No matter how good, no matter how well he's provided for, how much he's loved, he wants to leave. There's just something about it, no matter how good home is. If you look at this, actually, the way that he asks for his inheritance this way, he's basically telling his dad, I wish you were dead. That's what he's saying. I wish you were dead. That's not something that we think would go over very well today, although we are seeing that a little more prevalent where families, I've actually heard people say that about family members before. But that's not something that we hope or that we want to see. But in the culture that this story was taking place in, that Jesus was telling this in, the father could have legally beaten his son for saying this because it was literally saying, Dad, I wish you were dead. Could you imagine walking up to your dad and saying that? Again, he could have legally beaten his son for saying this. The son is immoral in this. He's rude. He's selfish. But those are all faults that we all sometimes fall into, isn't it? He's become obsessed with living the way that he wants. He treats his father with the utmost disrespect. Dr. Kenneth Bailey, he lived and taught in the Middle East for many, many years. And he said that he only ever heard of this scenario playing out twice in real life while he was in the Middle East. In the first case, the son that asked for his inheritance that basically said, I wish you were dead. The son was chased out of the house by his angry father and banished. It wasn't allowed to ever come back. The second, the father who was previously healthy before his son made this statement, had no health issues, died within 3 months of his son saying this. Died of a broken heart. I mean, that's all that I could see anyway. But if you think about it, I mean, this request starts off with just a little bit of selfishness. We all have that tendency from time to time. In fact, we talked a little bit about that in Sunday school this morning. Just that idea of wanting what we want and not maybe what is good for everyone. But I have to guess that he probably never intended to break his dad's heart. We never think that we would live with this much foolishness, though, would we? If we're really honest, though, I think we would have to admit that we've left home too. Now, I'm not saying our parents' home. That's healthy. We all get to a point in our lives where we need to grow up and move out of our parents' home. But this home that we're talking about is a metaphor for a relationship with God. For leaving God. Leaving our Father's house. Not our earthly home, our Father's house. In this parable, when that younger son leaves home, he's leaving God in the dust. He's walking away from God. So what makes us want to leave home? What would make that younger son want to leave home? What makes us think that we would be better off leaving a good father? We started off with a little bit of selfishness. We never really intend to break his heart or to destroy our relationship with him or our whole family. But what starts off as a little selfish ambition a lot of times ends up costing us more than we could ever imagine. We know that God cares for us. We know that He provides for us. We know that His love and His grace is what saved us from our sin. Home is good. Let me repeat that. Home is good. But there's something in us that makes us want to leave. Like a moth drawn to a light or to a flame. We just can't resist the urge to take our inheritance and go. But if we know home is so good, if we know that, why does anyone leave in the first place? What would make this younger son want to leave his father's house? I told you a story a few weeks ago, and it fits into this as well, about many of my classmates when I was growing up in East Tennessee. All they wanted to do was leave the Tri-Cities. They didn't think there was anything fun to do. Again, I challenge them to come live here if that's the case. Now, I love it here. I'm not saying that, but if they think there's nothing to do in Johnson City, come live in Canton when you have to drive an hour and a half to go do anything. But again, just that idea, a lot of times we want to leave home, and I think we want to leave God in that sense sometimes as well. There's three things that seem to be going on in this story, at least in the beginning. The idea first and foremost is, I want it now. We live in an instant gratification society, don't we? Everything is fast. Everything is now, now, now. If we have to wait for anything, it drives us crazy. We're not good at waiting. We have instant messaging, was really big a few years ago. Now everything's text messaging. But that instant connection with someone, microwaves. We have fast food restaurants everywhere. If we have to wait any time for anything, we get upset. But a lot of the Christian life, if you really look at it, a lot of the Christian life is based on delayed gratification, not instant gratification. We're saved, but we still live in a fallen world, so we wait. We have the sure hope of heaven, but we're not there yet, so we wait. We've been promised that all good things will work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. We know that. We've been told that. We've been promised that. But sometimes it sure doesn't seem like that's happening. So we wait. And after waiting for a while, it's easy to get sick of it and think, I want it now. So we leave the Father's house looking for what we think we should have. The second that we see here is that I deserve it. That entitlement attitude. Another reason that we leave the Father's house is a dangerous mentality of entitlement. This attitude says, I deserve it. I've been faithful long enough, now I deserve a break. I've been good long enough, now I deserve some real fun. I've been patient long enough, now I deserve some fulfillment. I've done it God's way long enough, now I deserve to do some things my own way. It kind of feels like what happens in this video.
What can I get for you?
Yes, I will have the
Ice cream. And you want chicken too? Oh, I just spilled. Your food will be out in just a little bit.
Obviously, in this story, the father represents God, and the younger son represents, well, most of the rest of us.
I need more fries.
If you've ever thought about chucking it all and starting over, if you've ever thought that you wanted more and deserved better, if you've ever felt like you were being held back or you were missing out or that you wanted to do things your own way, then perhaps you can identify with this younger son.
Have you ever felt like that? Like a never-ending reel of in and out, back and forth, going through the motions, in and out of church, wondering when you'll finally get the reward you deserve. Have you ever felt that way? What this mentality forgets is one of the core aspects of living a life saved by grace. We don't deserve it. We don't deserve any of the good things that God offers us. But He offers them freely. It's not about doing enough good things for a long enough time that we earn the right to leave the Father's house. It's about accepting God's gift of grace that we don't deserve in the first place. I've often said, I'm glad that this world isn't fair, that we don't get what we deserve, because we deserve nothing less than hell because we walked away. The third thing that we see here is that attitude of I can do better on my own. It's almost an attitude of bitterness. That third common attitude that makes us want to leave is that attitude of bitterness that says I can do better on my own. Can you really? You really get this idea from the younger son in Luke 15:12, though. It's not that his father hadn't provided for him. We saw that it was a good place that he was living. It's not that there was nothing to do on the family estate. It's not that there was anything the father was lacking. You get the sense that the son just wanted to do it on his own. He wanted to try his own hand, to be his own master, to lead his own life. In some ways, this third attitude is a combination of the first two. You want something now, you think you deserve it, that you've earned it, and you're tired of waiting, so you just want to forget God and do it on your own. I know we've all been there at times. But what this attitude again forgets is that the Christian life, living life in the Father's house, is about being a slave. The Apostle Paul uses that language frequently, that he is a slave of Christ. A slave has resigned all rights, all claims to power, all decision making. We as slaves of righteousness have surrendered to God. We don't get to call the shots. He does. He's the king. In one of his other books that Eidelman wrote early on in his writing career, he put this thought this way. He says, you can't call Jesus Lord without declaring yourself His slave. You can't call Jesus Lord without first declaring yourself His slave. But here's one of the most fascinating things about God. Just like the Father in the story, He'll let us make those statements. He'll let us walk away. It's not that He likes it when we do it. It's not that He couldn't do anything to stop us from doing it. But God is a God who allows us to choose Him or to choose to walk away from Him. And a lot of us, at one time or another, maybe right now for some of us, have said one of those statements to the Father and have walked away. It starts off as a little request, a little control, a little harmless pleasure. You're not trying to tell God that He has no place in your life, but you want to try it just this one time. You're not trying to tell God that He's not number one in your life, but can't there be a close second? You're not trying to tell God that He was wrong about marriage, but don't you deserve to be a little happier? You're not trying to tell God that you want nothing to do with Him, but it's just silly to give money to the church when your friends are driving luxury cars or big trucks. We may not intend to tell God that we wish He was dead, but that's exactly what we're saying. And here's the truth. We've all left the Father's house at one time or another. It's not so much a question of whether or not you left. It's not so much a question of what excuse you used to leave. It's much more of a question of whether or not you'll return. Because the beginning of the story can give us a hint to the end of it. The story began in the Father's house. Nothing was lacking. Nothing was missing. Everything's provided. The story can end there too. It doesn't matter why you wanted to leave. What matters is whether or not you will come back home. And that's what aha is all about. So maybe an aha story is beginning for you today. It's time to come home. And if you have wandered, if you have stepped away from God, all He asks is that you turn around and come back. He'll meet you. If you've never given your life to Jesus, what a great day to do that and to come home for the first time. Any decision you need to make this morning, now's the time as we stand and sing Seek Ye First, number 713.